In that case, I'm calling this meeting of the Sacramento City Unified School District Board of Education to order. Welcome. It's September 8th, 2021. Superintendent, can you please call roll?
Yes. Member Morawski.
Present.
Member Wu.
Present.
Member Villa.
Present.
Member Rhodes.
Present.
And Member Phillips.
Here.
Okay, and it looks like we have no public comment for the closed session. So with that, we will adjourn into closed. And board members, recall that you have a separate link, should be on an email invitation. Thank you. I'll see you in a bit. We are returning to open session. There is nothing to report out of closed session, and I'll hereby call the
Recording in
next item
progress.
to order. The 4.1 Facilities Master Plan, and hand it over to Ms. Rose Ramos. Please take it away.
Thank you, Member Morawski. Good evening, board members. Good evening, members of the public. Tonight, we're going to be presenting to you during this workshop, the school district's facility master plan. As we've presented in the last couple of workshops or board meetings on this plan, we've been providing you with an update on the progress to date. And in the course of those meetings, we shared with you quite a bit of information, the tools that were used to develop, as well more present and embedded there, and it's not allowed a lot of data, so to allow more. And so with that, I also say that we have our interim assistant superintendent, Mr. Ronald, had the pleasure of meeting some of the members that take on of our facilities, and then with also is Dr. Sato, former assistant superintendent, who now working with us on a interim basis as a consultant to help us see this plan. And we have staff available also for additional questions, and consultants from our architect team and RSS consultant group for any questions that are a little more detailed than we have in our presentation this evening. So with that, if we advance to the next slide. So this is the agenda for tonight's workshop. I'm going to go over a very brief definition of the facility master plan, just for members of the public that may not have listened to our prior presentations. We'll review again the methodology, the assessments and facility condition index, what those mean, the educational assessments, and then we'll describe function of core planning, the 4 principles that resulted from those with this group. We'll spend some time on the equity index and the criteria that was used to establish the priorities, and then we'll sum it up, summary, and then turn it over for questions and answers. So next slide, please. And here is just a very brief definition of a facility master plan. We borrowed this from the California School Boards Association website. We thought it was succinct enough, but yet had a little bit of detail to give people an idea of what is a facility master plan and why it's important. So basically what it is, this definition as it says, a comprehensive facility master plan. It's an essential element of the district's planning process, very similar that we've shared with an LCAP, or even taking it down to a school site level, a school site plan. It kind of tells describes what the plan is for this component of a school district. And in this particular case, it's what is the plan for repairing, for addressing, for improving our facilities over the next 5 years, and what are those costs? And in addition to that, of course, most importantly, what was the methodology? What tools did we use to come up with this? So reading again from this definition, the facility master plan provides a district with the information regarding the current and future needs for student housing, that means classrooms, of course, quality of the existing facilities, and facilities renovations and expansions that are required to support a district's educational and programmatic goals. And so what that means is that what are the repairs that are necessary? What modernization projects do we have to take on? Do we need to expand our facilities beyond what we currently have in order to support our program, in order to provide adequate classrooms for students? Very importantly, a facility master plan also assists the district in identifying the funding needs for these capital improvements and developing these financing options. Not just looking at a bond. Of course, a bond is a bulk of the financing that goes behind supporting the projects, the 40 facility master plan. But we know that there are other resources available that we can tap into, such as state matching funds that we may qualify for, such as our own, within our own budget, our routine restricted maintenance budget, to make sure that we are leveraging funds, to the extent possible. And then there are grants that are available project. And most recently, of course, are some of these COVID relief funds that have come our way, quite a bit of them. There have been some that have been specifically called out to say that, the intent is that these funds be used to improve or upgrade or do whatever is necessary to facilities in order to mitigate the spread of COVID. And so you've already seen some of those projects come to you for approval using some of those COVID relief funds. So again, this is just looking at all the options that are available to help bridge, the district's facility needs, the expenses that are associated with that. And so with that, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ronald Hickey, and he's going to take you through the assessments. If you could please advance to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Good evening, Board President and Board members. Let me first start with, in the 20 years that I've been doing school facilities, the team that has been assembled by Rose Ramos, DLR, RSS Consulting, Dr. Lee Sada, is one of the more impressive teams I have seen assembled in the 20 years that I've been doing building schools. So the facilities master plan that they have produced is just a great piece of work. It's a great document. And the question I think that we're all here to answer tonight, does this current facilities master plan meet the intent to inform and guide our facilities decision, which goes back into the definition that Rose just provided from the California State Board Association. So in my opinion, it does. But let's talk about the assessment piece and how we came to that. There's two parts. There's quantitative and there's qualitative. And in that quantitative space, we look at assessments, space inventory, capacity utilization, demographic data, and the equity measures. And that's a big part that RSS provided for us, the equity measure. I think that's the uniqueness of this facilities master plan, is the equity lens that was provided. Then there's qualitative, the interviews that DLR and the facilities team of Nathaniel and Amna provided, and also the LCAP review. And so those are the two parts of the methodology around what is the criteria for assessing facilities. And we could advance this to the next slide. And I know that the board has had this presentation previously, so my goal is not to repeat what you've already heard, but give a different perspective around assessments. And assessments is based on industry benchmarks. And those benchmarks are toward how do we define a high-performing school? When we think of facilities, what is a high-performing facilities within school? The things we consider: safety, heating and ventilation, how does the roofing perform, the parking lots, the sidewalk, the flooring, doors, windows, insulation. So we consider what is the safety, what is the performance, the integrity of the building system. Is it accessible? Does it meet ADA requirements? Environmentally, is it safe? The current systems, can they be retrofitted? Is there an adoption process that brings it to that benchmark of what is a high performance school? And lastly, what is the life cycle of that school? Has it reached its life cycle? And if so, then what does renewal look like? So think of assessment from the functional perspective and actually the cost perspective. You'll see from the next slide, if we can go to that next slide. How did this facilities master plan, the great work the DLR did, and around this facilities condition index, what does it really mean, board members, when we look at that facilities condition index? This slide is summarized by, there are 16 sites within this district that qualifies for renewal based on the benchmark that was used in this assessment. 47 sites, while they're serviceable, we should plan to renew those sites within the next 10 years. 30 sites are serviceable and functional. And again, going back to my previous statement around function, does it perform as a high performance school? So as you can see from just these numbers, 67% of our sites either qualify for renewal now or replacement within the next 10 years. That's 76% of our sites based on the facilities condition index utilized by DLR and the facilities master plan team who put all this work together. So when we look at that 67%, something that we have to consider, when we reach an age and a facilities condition to where these schools need immediate replacement or approaching replacement within the next 10 years, the maintenance and operational cost is the most expensive that the facilities will experience. So M&O is spending the highest number of dollars possible to keep these schools functional. So that's another thing to consider when you consider assessment. What is the current cost to maintain these schools in their current condition based on the facilities condition index? And if we can go to the next slide, please. If we could advance to the next slide. So what DLR and the facilities master plan core group put together was an assessment of all 93 sites. And there's a grand total, you see, of $3.5 billion. And we have a bond of $750 million. So this facilities master plan is a tool that will inform and guide us into making right facility decisions on how we spend the $750 million, knowing it's going to fall short of what we really need to bring all of our facilities to a high performance school standard. And so, and those decisions are tough to make. And this tool will help us make those decisions around how do we spend money for elementary schools, high schools, middle schools. How do we spend it in year 1, year 3, throughout the 10-year life cycle, hopefully, of the facilities bond, knowing that not everything can get done. And so, and that's how we come to this facilities condition index to guide us on how best to spend those facilities bond dollars. Next slide. Okay. Then we go into the education assessment. Facilities, high performing facilities. The education assessment assesses what does it mean to be a high performing school academically. What is the learning environment, facilities? Dining experience, nutrition. Is it sufficient? Safety and security. The safety and security in the educational assessment falls back into do they attract athletes to stay within their communities. And so this great tool that's been provided comes from a facilities perspective in terms of assessment and an educational perspective as it relates to assessment. Next slide. And here, I'm going to let Dr. Lee Sada come in and talk about the project priority methods around the 4 principles of equity by the core planning group.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Hickey, and good evening, board members, Superintendent Aguilar. So I'm going to pick it up here to talk about the project priority methodology that's been used, or we would like to use, to bring forward projects for approval by the board. And I want to make clear that the core planning group, which was a group consisting of faculty and staff members, community members, and it was a fairly large group, actually created this definition as a way to ensure that we all could agree on what the principles of equity would be. And the condition of the schools, but also consider additional factors related to equity, which I'm going to go through shortly in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So in short, as Ron just suggested, we have 2 types of projects to keep it simple. We've created project type A, which is based on the facilities condition index. And we have those in 2 categories. So there's subcategory A1. And this is based on the first and three most important categories that were raised and identified in the Facilities Condition Index, which is safety, performance integrity, and accessibility. And these categories would include things like observed or reported unsafe conditions. Something that we've all noticed across the schools are unreliable system performance, such as roofs and HVAC, etc. We certainly need to address ADA issues and any, frankly, other unsafe environmental conditions. These categories are essentially categories that would represent risk to the district, and they do need to be addressed. The second category of project type A would be the full campus renewal, which would be based on a high FCI. So if we had a facilities condition index of 20% or higher, it would be a potential opportunity to identify that campus for full renewal, which could be anything from a full modernization to a complete replacement. Next slide, please. The second type of project that we've been are interested in is what we call the visionary projects, and these are based on the equity indicators, and I'm going to go through them again. If you recall in our last board work session, Dr. Regina Stanbeck-Stroud touched on these, but I'll just quickly talk about them, and I've brought forward another slide to give you a little bit more detail on some of the background here. So first of all, we are looking at neighborhoods that have high segregation and poverty. These would be identified as neighborhoods in California that consistently meet standards for both poverty, which means 30% of the population is below the federal poverty line, and they are racially segregated, meaning they're overrepresented by peoples of color relative to the overall county. The second piece of data in the index would be neighborhoods with low resources. So these would be a block of neighborhoods with the lowest economic, environmental, and educational resources in California, but not meeting the previous definition of high segregation and poverty criteria. Next slide, please. The other thing, as you recall, we just talked about how another equity indicator is to tie our plan into the LCAP. And the LCAP specifically identifies students that are in a high or moderate to high priority group. And these students include, when we disaggregate the overall student body, these would be largely BIPOC students, African American, American Indian, Alaska Native. You can see the list there. In addition to that, students with disabilities, English learners, foster youth, and homeless youth. Just as a friendly reminder that the district does acknowledge that persistent gaps in performance for the specifically prioritized students are unacceptable, and that the system we have historically operated has perpetuated these outcomes. This is actually from the documentation from the LCAP itself. Next slide, please. One of the indicators that was used in the demonstration in our last meeting that Anton Blewett demonstrated for us from DLR Group was he gave us and showed us on the website a series of maps. And this data was from something called the Berkeley Opportunity Map. And these maps are actually intended for the use by public agencies, and they specifically give policymakers and stakeholders a quantifiable measure of opportunity to direct public investments, which would include capital improvement bonds, and providing a map that displays the distribution of opportunity across neighborhoods. The thing that's kind of important about this, and the takeaway that we'd like you to remember, is that you see the final sentence there is where we live determines our upward social mobility. These maps actually were developed by a group in Berkeley that are associated with the university, and it's research-based. Next slide, please. The second piece of data that we'd like to share with you this evening is a set of interviews that were conducted by the RSS group, and they interviewed several members of the core planning group. And these members, the data was compiled from those interviews, and there were several findings that rose to the surface that are identified here. The first one was that there was a desire and a request to make education and school facilities equitable to all. And again, leaning back into those first four principles, that is the definition of equity that we all agreed upon. The top considerations for equity planning in facilities would be that schools are a key neighborhood asset. They are an integral part of urban planning. The second idea here was that we need to address opportunity gaps for all students. And finally, that we need to focus on functional change, not just cosmetic change. The interview findings also suggested that we distribute funds fairly using these equity metrics, that equity be an integral part of how funds are distributed, and that we consider making equity real. There were several comments about making sure that not only do we talk about equity and we express our affinity for equity, that we make it real by making our actions meet our words. And of course, that means really using these metrics as we parcel out the funding. There was also a concern that over time and in the past here at this district, there has been a lack of meaningful community input, but that the board and staff have a real opportunity here to build trust by following through on these findings and the data that's been provided in this tool. Next slide, please. There were specific considerations that have gone into this plan. Again, has been stated several times by the core planning group that neighborhoods matter, that schools are truly community centers that encourage community connectivity and economic activity, and that specific neighborhoods have been historically underserved here in the Sacramento City Unified School District. The second major consideration is that, as we've spoken about in the past, student transfer rates do hurt certain neighborhoods and the schools in those neighborhoods. In fact, approximately 30% of the students transfer to schools in this district outside of their neighborhood. And frankly, facility quality matters. So the quality of the facilities could go a long way towards encouraging those students to stay. And then finally, school capacity and utilization rates alone are misleading. The goal the idea here is that success leads to success, right? and that even in a district where enrollments may be falling, and in schools specifically, specific schools where enrollments may be falling, there is an opportunity to right-size those underutilized schools. So in other words, just as an example, and I'm making up numbers, if we had a school that had 600 students or the capacity for that, and it currently has 500, the idea here is rather than close the school, we're suggesting that the school has an opportunity potentially to be rebuilt, and thus allowing the district to grow again over time, and allowing the principal and the staff at those schools to, kind of rebuild, now having a new school that would meet the educational assessments that Ron spoke about earlier. And then finally, that there may be something here about cost savings, is that sometimes they're overstated, because often when schools are closed, those students transfer to other schools and the staff transfers with them. And so it's true that there may be some savings at the administrative level, but we're probably really talking only about a small number of administrators at that point. And again, if we go back up then to that first bullet, that specific neighborhoods, that schools are community centers and encourage community connectivity and economic activity, the loss of that school to that neighborhood could really be devastating over time. Next slide, please. So what does this criteria lead to? It leads to a range of projects, and we want to emphasize that it's a range. So again, as I said earlier, project type A's are essentially must-do projects that have risk to the district if they're not addressed. And these would be identified by the facility assessments and specifically the facility condition index. Again, we've talked about those categories. Ron shared the 6 categories with you, and we're proposing that the top 3 categories must be addressed. And then secondly, project type B is that you have visionary projects which are prioritized by these equity indexes that we just shared with you, which would allow us to address the 6 educational petals. Ron summarized those petals in this meeting, but if you recall from our last meeting, again, Anton from the DLR group did a very kind of a little bit of a deeper dive into the educational assessments and the research-backed nature of how those assessments lead to higher performance by students. So, and then the final point here is that all projects, whether it's project type A or B, will be presented at future meetings and approved by this governing board. Next slide, please. So this was the table that we showed last time. We wanted to clarify it one more time and emphasize that the criteria represents, again, a range of options. And frankly, if you look at the criteria range, number 1, again, it's the top 3 FCI categories. So that has to do with health and safety, performance and integrity, and ADA issues. Those are high-risk areas for the district, and they need to be addressed at any school, regardless of its location. That's considered project type A1. The second criteria is where we integrate the equity index into the selection process. And what we're suggesting here is that when we look at neighborhoods that have high segregation and poverty, and we combine those with schools that have students identified as high or moderate to high in terms of their need for scaffolding, that really should be your second priority, right up there in terms of the visionary projects. And that would be then project type B1. The third criteria would be those neighborhoods that have access to low resources, and combined with, again, those same sets of students who need perhaps additional scaffolding, and then adding in this facility condition index. Those would give you a set of schools that would also qualify under that visionary project list. And then finally, we just use the FCI indicators. So again, just the facility condition index. But as Ron pointed out in one of those charts, we have 13 or so schools that have an FCI above 20% and therefore do qualify for some sort of major modernization or even replacement. So again, there's your full range of projects from A1 to A2 with B1 and B2 in between. So again, using the FCI Facilities Condition Index, as well as the indexes, equity indices that we shared. Next slide, please. So we wanted to provide you with what this might look like. It's essentially a snapshot of an overall facility spending plan for this $750 million. And you can see these numbers are, again, these are just estimates and really should be thought of as sort of budgetary items, but there is some basis here in terms of what the district has spent in past programs. You're going to need some funding set aside to have internal staff and external consultants manage your program, right? We're also suggesting that it's good practice to have some short duration bonds where you can spend it on technology. Technology changes so quickly and you want to stay abreast of what's happening out there. And so you need to have some capital funds to address those issues. One of the third item here is something that kept coming up in our community forums. As you recall, we had a series of community forums online. There were 5 of them, and we hope to continue those. But a consistent theme was the desire to have a sustainability plan. And so we're suggesting that that work needs to be done and there should be some set aside to address those issues. And then, of course, we think that it's best practice to have a program contingency. The environmental and economic situation changes over time and, projects may go over budget, some may come in under budget, but you want to have a contingency to address those issues. So when you add up those 4 pieces of information, that's about 25% of your bond. Now, if you take the tools that DLR has provided and you sort over a 10-year period, the top 3 categories that were addressed in the Facilities Condition Index, you will end up with a number that represents about 17% of the bond. And if you spend all of that money, you will address those top 3 priorities, the most important ones, over the duration of the bond period. So when you add the 25% to the 17%, what you're left at the end, and really in a way you've backed into this number, you have approximately just shy of 60% of your bond that can be allocated to these visionary projects, utilizing the equity index as a sorting tool to prioritize those projects. Next slide, please. So let's dig in just a little bit deeper. We just want to reemphasize, again, those final 2 categories. The FCI projects, which are the projects we must address, yields about $126 million, or 17% of the bond, as I just stated. And they address, if you look at the facility conditions, school by school, we have the reports. The top 3 categories for each school in aggregate are safety or health and safety. The second item is performance integrity. And the third one is accessibility. And those 3 numbers are from the assessment work that was done by DLR and DLR's consultants. And then secondly, as I suggested, there's the vision projects then left over, or that we backed into in terms of an overall number, representing 58% of the bond. And so we're suggesting that we use the sorting tool using the criteria B1, which I explained earlier, neighborhood plus LCAP identified student. Secondly, B2, neighborhood plus LCAP identified student plus the FCI. And then the third category, A2, FCI greater than 20%. Again, recall that FCI and vision projects will seek approval simultaneously. So in other words, we don't have to do one or the other. We can do both. And it'll come down to staff capacity and the amount that we want to spend on kind of a year-by-year basis. Next slide, please. So in summary, and what are the next steps? We're asking and seeking approval of the project prioritization methodology, which includes the website tool, which was previewed for you in the last meeting, and the equity index, which I hope I've explained to you and happy to take questions on. And the methodology, which is essentially, we sometimes call it the instruction manual, is the document that staff can use that sort of reminds them kind of how to go through these steps. We want to remind you that these were based on assessments, communication and input and feedback from the core planning group, district staff and leadership, as well as significant amount of community input. Again, we've demonstrated to you that the sustainability plan and additional live forums have been requested by the community, and it would behoove all of us to continue to do those. So certainly when we can get back together, and after we get past the pandemic. Another point to emphasize is the project list will be approved separately from the facilities master plan. And just a friendly reminder that the facilities master plan will evolve over time as conditions and priorities change. Next slide. So we're happy to take your questions. We hope we've explained things a little bit more thoroughly with this extra time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Sata. If I could just interject really quickly, this is Rose. I just wanted to allow Mr. Hickey just to share just a couple of updates on some other projects that are not included here, and just so that our public and our board is aware that we've not lost sight of those. So, Mr. Hickey?
Thank you, Rose. And as Rose stated, that we are aware that the facilities master plan, while it assessed the entire district, the bond money does not allow us to address every need in the district. And so outside of the equity lens, outside of the categories that DLR and Dr. Sada and the team of Nathaniel Amna has put together, there are other needs in the district. So how do we address those other needs? So what we can consider is what are those legacy projects, those projects that has been passed down from year to year that may not fall into the categories that's going to allow those facilities to receive some of these immediate dollars in the bond. And how do we fund it? So when we go back to the number that Dr. Sada provided, in those vision projects, which is, he estimated, would be about 58% of the bond dollars, which comes out to $436 million. All of the vision projects qualify for state reimbursement. The state right now is will be placing AB 75 on the next ballot. That is approximately a $17.5 billion facilities bond. And so within the life cycle of this current bond that the district has, there's every expectation that the state is going to pass a bond. So new construction and modernization qualifies for reimbursement. What that means to this board is that the $436 million that we will spend on the project identified in this assessment, we will receive that $436 million back in reimbursements, which allows us to go after those legacy projects. And there are a tremendous amount of legacy work to be done. Again, DLR and this facilities master plan identifies $3.5 billion worth of work. And so we can expect to receive $436 million back if we stick to the plan as it has been laid out very smartly by Dr. Sada and the work that the facilities master plan group has put together. So to Rose's point, we are keenly aware that there's other work to be done in the district. You know, as we had the pleasure of touring with several board members over the past month, we identify some of those needs, and those needs are not going unnoticed. We know that there's more work to be done in the district, but funding becomes an issue. We also have projects that we're completing with Measure Q money. We have some money coming back from those projects once we close those out. For an example, the central kitchen. Once that project is completely closed out, we're expecting some of that money to return back to be available for legacy projects. And so that's how we plan to address those other issues that may fall outside of the purview of the assessments that we have made smartly. So as we go into this discussion session, if there's any discussion around other projects, we can also discuss how we plan to fund that and how other projects may fall into the category of the legacy projects that has been in dire need in this district for a number of years. And so that's how this current team plans to address those legacy needs. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. And I'll turn it over to you, Member Morowski, for questions and answers.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for that overview and the little more depth that we dove into here. I have many questions. I'm sure my fellow board members do too. So if you could just raise your hand on the Zoom if you wanted to ask questions or have comments.
Excuse me, Vice President Morowski.
Oh, I'm sorry. Public comment.
We do have one public comment from Mo Kashmiri.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Go ahead, Mo.
Hey, everybody. As the report says, we have $3.5 billion of need and only a $750 million bond. If we're going to talk about equity, what we really need to be doing is pushing to meet all the needs of the district. That's a basic. I feel like we need to be looking at another bond now. I think this board should be approving now money to do a poll to see if we could actually use COVID as a way to push it. I know with COVID, not only were our ventilation systems an issue, but our electrical systems were an issue. We had teachers with one outlet in their classroom, right? This is not something that can work long term. So again, I'm urging the board to do right now, put aside money to do a poll to see if we could, see if there's additional money that could be captured right now in this atmosphere, and then eventually getting that on the ballot. I also want to echo that we need to have something of making sure that our schools are carbon free and green as well. We can't just have, like the climate crisis is the crisis of our age. We're seeing it in the wildfires, the floods, everything. We have to address this now. And I'm disappointed that the plan that was come back didn't address things like solar, didn't address things like how do we make sure these schools are carbon free. So again, I'd ask the board to ensure those things happen. But this is the moment. Now's your chance, right? Either we're going to do it or we're just going to be left with $2 billion plus of needs that don't get filled, and it'll be on this group if you didn't take that action. So I'm asking you to do that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo, for that comment. Okay. Do any of my fellow board members have any questions? Member Phillips.
There is no hand raise button, so
My apologies. Oh, my apologies.
I can't find it, but I give up on that. So this is just for Mr. Hickey real quick. When he talks about legacy projects, you're talking about the vision projects, correct?
Thank you for your question.
Or the legacy. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So thank you for your question, Member Phillips. The legacy projects will be separate from the vision projects. For an example, and I'm sure we'll get more into this, when we look at the LCAP and the local control funding formula, the equity lens suggests that how we spend the bond dollar, it should fall in alignment with how we spend as it relates to LCAP and local control funding formula. And so when we look at schools that not qualify for Title I funding, they may fall outside of this conversation, but they're a legacy project. So we have some very high performing schools, but they may not be high performing facilities wise. So when we go back in and look at the legacy projects, then some of these high performing schools as it relates to educational assessment, but they perform poorly from a facility assessment perspective and may have a high facilities condition index. How do we go back and have an impact on those needs? And so that's what I'm suggesting, that we create a separate legacy list as it relates to funding that becomes available through the reimbursement process, not the current $750 million that we have available. But as we receive our reimbursements, how do we fund those projects that we know will still have dire needs within the district?
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Were you all set, Member Phillips? Okay. Member Wu.
Thank you. Mr. Hickey, where does Kennedy High School, with the field that it has, in dire need of repair because it has huge tunnels made by burrowing animals, fall within this context?
Well, I believe it falls within this context when we look at safety. That first category that Dr. Sada spoke of. And again, we have not created a list yet. The facilities master plan will be a tool to help us create that list. So when we look at those needs, Member Wu, and and it's not just Kennedy, it's some of the sites that you and I visited, doing our tour. So what are those categories where things it just must be done? So we have fields that have holes in them for whatever reason, whether it's pests, improper use, improper maintenance, and they become a safety risk to our students and our staff, then we'll use this facilities master plan as a tool for making sure that those issues are addressed and attach an appropriate priority to those particular issues. And again, and that's where we're bringing this list back to the board. That's where the board will participate with us in approving a list that will best suit the needs of the district.
Thank you.
All set, Member Wu? I guess so. Member Garcia.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to bounce around a bit with my questions. Just a quick question on the legacy projects. That is assuming that the district manages to somehow, I guess for a lack of a better word, either capture savings or bring in additional revenue, right? Whether it's through any state opportunities, through hopefully a future school bond, or maybe even capture savings from other projects. Within the district, does that conversation come back to the board to figure out what is considered a legacy project? And how do we prioritize those legacy projects? Does that come back to the board?
I'll respond to that, Member Garcia. And the quick answer is absolutely. Our goal is not to do anything in isolation of the board. This should be a team effort, between facilities, our chief business officer, Rose, the superintendent, and the board. To where everyone has a say in this. So we should have no conversations in isolation. And so, in my opinion, the board plays a critical and integral role to how we satisfy the needs of the district going forward as it relates to facilities.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm trying to, as the presentation was unfolding, I'm trying to think of the most, I'm most familiar with school sites in Area 2. So trying to figure out, how do I categorize all these schools, right? And they may possibly fall into this category or that category. So I'm really trying to find an element of fairness while also, committing to equity. So I'm trying to figure out that balance. So I just need some clarity on and I'm looking at the slides on the type A projects. So in slide, I think 10, you had type A projects fall within A1 and A2, and these are the must-do projects. And I think that was a total of about 17% of the bond. But at the end, one of the final slides, you separated A2. So I'm trying to understand how did A2, which is full campus renewal based on high FCI. So this is just based on the life of the building, if you will, because many of these schools were built, pre-1950s, right? So we have a lot of very old schools. So I'm just trying to figure out how why A2 is now part of the vision projects for FCI greater than 20% on slide 19.
I can answer that, I think. So thank you for that great question, Member Garcia. I'm going to tie it a little bit to Mr. Hickey's comments about legacy projects. I think in general, what we're always doing is we're looking for alternative or additional source of funds. And that can come, as Mr. Hickey alluded to, in state money and matching funds and other sources of funds. And of course, you've got your expert, Ms. Ramos, who also, helps make sure that those things get funded. The tool is intentional in its ability to provide choices for the staff while still providing a very strong data-oriented approach. So in other words, if we found a school that had several defects and were leading to health and safety issues, and it's particularly egregious at an entire campus, we have the ability to move that project up onto the list to move forward. And that in the high FCI or the FCI in the Facilities Condition Index in general applies to all schools across the district. So in other words, while there are certain neighborhoods that have certainly been historically marginalized, and the data points to those schools as being the schools that would qualify for the visionary allocation, if you will, there are additional funds and potential other sources and the ability to add other schools purely based on facilities condition that are encountered, particularly if it creates a health or safety or other liability issue for the district. And those full school remodels, they may be anything from, addressing very specific conditions to entire campuses.
So the A2 sort of needs that where the FCI is greater than 20%, that equity index will be layered on top of that. And the only one that doesn't have the equity index layered on top of it is the A1 projects. Those are like the highest liability for the district. Am I understanding that correctly? Because all of a sudden you lost me when A2 appears under the vision projects, when in a previous slide, it was still part of the FCI project must address.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I would agree that, so
Okay.
we were trying to, obviously it's a complex topic that we're trying to make simple. And so what we're really trying to say here is there's two types of projects, those related to facilities conditions, which are categorized as A, and those related to equity indicators, which are categorized as B. But in the summary chart that I provided, you see that we talked about it being a range of projects from 1 through 4, if you use the criteria. And for better or for worse, the way it lays out is A1, B1, B2, and then A2. So I apologize for not being more clear about that. I think in many ways it's a nomenclature issue, but we were trying to be simple in the two buckets of types of projects that we're trying to address.
Okay.
Member Garcia, can I add to Dr. Sato's
Sure.
comments?
Sure.
If we consider the tour that we were on with you at
Right.
Sauter Middle School, Sauter Middle School is a great example from a facilities perspective of high-performance schools. If I go back to the facilities master plan that was approved by the board in 2012, Sauter Middle School was a low-performance school from a facilities perspective in 2012. It's performing even lower now. So in that first category, A1, what Dr. Sauter is saying, that we know there are some safety, accessibility issues that must be addressed at Sauter Middle School. But beyond those initial, those initial dollars within that 17%, based on just the brief tour that we did of that school that day, it's apparent that other dollars need to be spent on Sauter Middle School. And those other dollars, as it relates to modernization of portions of that campus, that becomes a legacy project, which will be funded through however we come into that revenue as it relates to state reimbursements, other revenue streams. And so, because we did see some things that needs to be addressed. The safety is part of this facilities master plan. If it falls outside of that portion of this facilities master plan, we're going to bring it into the legacy projects. But that's not a site that I'm letting you know and the rest of the board. That's not a site that's off my radar screen because I know what we observed that day.
So just for my clarification, one site can be categorized in multiple ways based on the need or the project, right? So using your same example, Sutter will be categorized as A1. There's some things that will happen because there's safety issues. Then they may end up in A2 for a different, need. they may end up maybe not in B1, 2, but maybe in legacy. So a site has multiple, I guess, opportunities.
Yes.
Okay, so I think
Yes.
that's really important to just maybe, as we continue to have this conversation, to clarify, because initially I thought one site was going to have one category and they live with that, right? And so how do you continue to meet their needs? And then a site like Sutter, I wanted to ask a question about the school capacity, because they're essentially they have a high enrollment. They could, it's not uncommon for them to have a wait list. So one of the examples that was used earlier was that right-sizing the opportunity, if there's an under-enrollment, but what are we doing for the schools that are at capacity or can accommodate more students because of the demand? So how are we treating those schools? Because we have several of those schools where they're in high demand and they just don't have room to accept any more students. So I think that if somebody can just walk me through an example like that, that would be helpful.
I'll start, and then Dr. Sada can. I know he has a lot to say on this, but it goes back to the one thing that Dr. Sada spoke of in terms of what is the value of a school to a community. We have parents and students who leave their neighborhoods to go to other schools within this district. So part of this facilities master plan and how we use it as an informational tool is if we rebuild schools in the neighborhoods where those students and parents currently reside, it may have an impact on those schools that are overcrowded currently. Because like all of us, we want the best for our kids. And so they're trying to get the best education. So Southern Middle School is a great example. We have to ask ourselves, why is it busting at the seams? It may be because of the students who are traveling across town to enroll in that school. We need to use this equity lens and this facilities tool to make the decision on, do we renew that school in that community? Because that school is of value. And then everyone stays in place. And then we're able to not have schools that are disproportionately enrolled when we have some that are losing enrollment. It may be because the school in there that's across the street is not suitable to them because it's a low performing school facilities wise. Dr. Sada.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think Mr. Hickey explained it really well. I mean, that is obviously a choice for the board, but it is our belief that the schools and neighborhoods where the students need additional supports, once we rebuild those schools or modernize those schools in a way that fulfills the 6 educational petals that, again, the DLR team identified last week, that those facilities will become very attractive for students and that those students will find success. And we hope that those students would then stay in their local neighborhood. And that makes communities stronger. It makes neighborhoods stronger. It increases the value of the homes in that neighborhood. And so there's a real direct connection, research-based, between looking at true equity and allowing those communities to flourish because we make these sort of longer-sighted, long-term investments in those communities. And I think I've kind of just restated what Mr. Hickey said slightly differently. So.
Okay.
Can I just jump in there really quick, Member Garcia? I'm sorry. I just wanted to also add to this because it's a really important topic. I'm so glad you guys brought it up. We've got to remember that our core community group also brought this up, and it's on slide 15. And that was one of the things that they really impressed upon us, that we can't ignore this, that we do have this very high transfer rate, and that it is hurting those communities from which those students are transferring from. We've seen that. So I just wanted to remind us that that is one thing that was specifically asked of this this whole group, that we keep that in mind in the forefront.
No,
Right.
you know, and also consider the student capacity of the district based on current classrooms. This school district has the capacity for about 68,000 students, but we only have about 40,000 students enrolled. So why have those 28,000 decided to enroll somewhere else? It may be because of the conditions of the school within their community. And I think one of the goals should be to reclaim some of those students for this district so that our numbers will increase as opposed to continuing this decline. And I think DLR, Dr. Sada, and RSS did a great job of emphasizing that possibility. If we restore the schools to high performance school level, can we reclaim our students? Can we increase student enrollment, increase ADA, which gives us that ADA, that increase in ADA allows us to perform more of the legacy work.
And I understand that. I get that. Facilities is one key component to, attract and retain the kids from the neighborhood. But we also need, it's the programmatic part, right? That is also critical and factors into the decision-making of our families. So where they choose to go, right? So I get that. So, and I understand this is like an ongoing conversation. So I appreciate the answers. I do just have two last, just one quick just comment and then a final just inquiry. One, I think it would be helpful to understand how we've used some of our one-time funds through CARES, ESSER, our COVID dollars to address maybe some of the needs that you've identified at some of these sites, because this is all we have. We don't know where the sites, any given site ranks compared to this this particular process. But it would be helpful to understand what has been addressed that can maybe make available other bond dollars to meet another need, right? So, that would be helpful. And then lastly, just going back to a comment that Board Member Wu made relative to Kennedy and some of the athletic fields there. I'm just trying to figure out where might a campus, for example, like Hiram Johnson, who does not have a baseball field, who has an incomplete, for example, football, it has the field, but it doesn't have the bleachers. It doesn't have other amenities that go with football, a football field. I'm just trying to figure out, would they fall under this particular, type, B or category, maybe A, but also wondering if they would fall under of the legacy projects. So just because they're the only comprehensive high school in the district that does not have a baseball field, and that impacts the ability to have our students participate in that sport in a way that they can be more competitive, throughout the district. So right now they practice at a Little League field nearby, but it's a Little League. It's not, it doesn't meet the need of high school. And permanent lighting is also a high need. I know that we may have other opportunities to address that particular need, but I just wanted to just get a sense of where a school like Hiram Johnson would fall under this particular formula relative to a baseball field and completing the football field.
Yeah, I guess I can take a stab at that question. Again, the tool allows for staff now to bring forward a set of projects, on whatever basis, time basis they choose to do. I just looked up Hiram Johnson, and it is one of the, a little bit higher in terms of the amount needed for the project type A. We don't rank order those projects, but there is a total amount of funding listed And so again, the idea here is that the staff has the ability to, through a sorting process, to identify those needs that should be addressed sooner. The comprehensive list, again, of items, 1, 2, and 3 on the facilities condition index is a big total. And so, they're going to have to work hard to bring as many of those forward as possible because there are issues with that. And to your point, Member Garcia, Hiram Johnson is, again, a higher dollar value. That could indicate it's a bigger school, but it could also indicate that there's several things that should be addressed.
And just one last one, because I just remembered this one. I looked at the language from our resolution that explicitly sets aside at least 1% for early education classrooms. So I don't know how that translates in terms of the final numbers that we see, if it's really a set aside of at least 1%, so that at least we know not to count on that amount for anything else other than early education classrooms. So I just needed to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Garcia. Great questions. Member Phillips.
Just a question about how these projects fit into areas that don't have, say, middle schools or high schools. I don't have a middle school. I don't have a high school in Area 5. And I mean, is there anything that we're doing to increase the opportunities to go to middle school and to high school in your home community?
No. The initial response to that, Member Phillips, is that in the aggregate, California Department of Education only allows us to build schools where the community has demonstrated a need based on the population within that area. And so there would have to be an assessment made that suggests that we're eligible to build a middle school or high school in any part of the district. While there are some districts, areas that may not have a particular level of education, it's really based on what is the district's enrollment capacity within that area. So in your particular district falls into that category that when it comes to development, does development suggest that we will even be eligible, and will the California Department of Education allow us to build a new school? The one thing that we can't do in the state of California, we can't build schools without the current capacity for it. It only allows a forecast of 3 years, 5 years max in some instances. So we can't build schools based on what may happen, say, 20 years from now. So we have to have on the books within the city of Sacramento developments that's been approved that's going to bring in X amount of apartments, so we can calculate what the student population will be at that time. And then that's how we make the decisions on how we build schools. The other issue that we're facing in this district, as I mentioned earlier, we have a capacity for 68,000 students. So we'd be hard pressed to even qualify at the state level on needing to build a school anywhere in this district, because we have the capacity for an additional 28,000 students already.
So does that mean that, the district really should be thinking about not being such an open enrollment school? Because it's not going to increase at all in my area in terms of middle school or high school, because we're never going to have the demand. Until gentrification gets done wiping out, most of the old folks and stuff. So I don't know. The educational opportunities are very limited in Area 5, and it's disappointing. But you can do what you can do with the money and how it's earmarked to be used. So I understand that, but gotta be something. Anyway, that's just me. I'm frustrated. Sorry. Area 5 pains. We're moving on.
Thank you, Member Phillips. Very insightful comments and questions. I had some similar questions. I wanted to just make sure if any of my other board members have any questions before I ask some. Okay.
I'll ask mine after yours. I'm just listening
Oh,
to
okay.
the comments.
Sure. Okay.
I'm
That's
listen to
fine.
everyone first before I say anything.
That's fine. Whatever your preference. So I guess I had a question that kind of follows on to Member Phillips' question, and that is how you talked about the Berkeley Opportunity Study and identifying neighborhoods that benefit from more investment. We talked about the equity index. I'm just curious, like with all of the study that was done and the assessment to just learn more about what does the current investment pattern of our district look like? Like, what does it reflect overall? Does it reflect, an overinvestment in certain areas that are, higher income, or does it in fact reflect a disinvestment in lower income areas of our city? I just really want to understand like where we're starting from, so we can make good decisions about where we go from here. I don't know who that's to.
Yeah, no, I can help. I don't have the answer for you tonight. Member Borowski, the specific dollar amount spent from prior bonds or facility funds, but just looking at the data and looking at the schools that are rising to the top in terms of need, it is pretty apparent that there's been just more modernization dollars or more investment facility funds in certain parts of our district. But we have that data because we have to, submit reports constantly on how we're spending the money, where we're spending the money. Mm-hmm. So why don't you give us some time to put that together so that we could at least, provide it by area, by school site, and and we can report out on that. That's a good question.
Yeah, and sure, and I was thinking also about not just the bond dollars that we have allocated in the past, but kind of where we're starting from in terms of like a heat map or the the facilities condition overall, because I have been grappling with this question of equity as applied to facilities, because like I know in my area it is a higher income area. I also know like the schools are very old and they're not like snappy and in wonderful condition. I mean, to my layperson eyes, right? So I'm really curious to know, to give us more of a basis for understanding, what the historical patterns have been of, do we see these patterns across the district in very apparent ways? I hear that on the bond dollars that have been invested in the past. I guess I would, whatever you can.
Sure.
I don't want to ask for a whole lot of, a big new analysis or anything. I just, I think in the course of this careful and detailed assessment, I mean, I feel like there must be information that would be really helpful to share with the board.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I just think it's important for the community to understand, frankly, where have we invested and where have we dropped the ball, and I think that would help us, to see, well, yeah, obviously this is these are where the real needs are because we've just underinvested so heavily in this area or whatever. So I really appreciated the conversation. And I also just want to take the opportunity to really thank and recognize Dr. Sada and Mr. Hickey for all of the work that you've put in and for being there for us to get us through this, and really appreciate your experience and professionalism and you sharing that with us. So,
if I could add,
sure.
I'm not going to take any credit from Lee and DLR and RSS. The tremendous work has really been done by Anton and Dr. Sada and Nathaniel and Amna. That has been the heavy lift. Now, I've only been here for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. That's why I can appreciate the gravity of the work that has been done, the team that Rose has assembled, which lends itself to me having some pretty easy answers because the hard work was done before I showed up. So all the credit to the team. I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Well said, like a true professional. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Member Morowski, if I can just interject real quickly, I do want to just also say thank you to the team. Oftentimes people ask whether Sac City has an equity department, an equity unit, and I often say that we don't. Because this work of equity, access, social justice can't be a standalone department or a standalone unit. It has to really be the backbone of the organization. And I just want to just acknowledge that this is a team that has really leaned in because, as you were mentioning, Member Morowski, this is not a body of work of how equity, access, and social justice shows up in the world of facilities. And so I'm just proud that, again, we have a team that has leaned in and understood the task that this is a philosophy that has to penetrate and become the backbone of the organization and not be a standalone effort with a standalone leader that's trying to penetrate a philosophy. I've been in that position. It's a very difficult position to be in. And so I'd rather strive for it to penetrate as a backbone of the organization. And in terms of governance, I just appreciate that this effort hopefully will give greater confidence to board members that they not feel that they have to focus on facilities issues because they might trust that we are using data very proactively so that you feel greater confidence that we understand the needs from a facilities perspective at each of your trustee areas. Because I do think that oftentimes board members are in a position where they feel like they need to advance the needs of their individual trustee areas. And I'd rather figure out how, in partnership with our board, we can continue to refine this approach so that you can have greater confidence and you can express that to each of your constituents as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and completely appreciate that. I think that's a perennial challenge, and I recognize that we the board has not frankly been very involved in the development of this plan. I assume by design, and but I do it's another one of my kind of questions or lines of thinking about how we approach this is just we can look at what's been assessed, but there are also other things that that may be priorities that come from the community, like we've talked about outdoor education and facilities around that. But I've heard a lot about safe routes to school and that sort of infrastructure. We've talked about green and making that a priority. So I just really want to understand better how do those, it's a balance, right? Board members are representing the communities we come from, and the priorities that we're hearing from the community. So data is great, and you can't, nobody's going to argue with this ventilation system needs to be upgraded or replaced like that. There's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of areas where, if the board wants to prioritize, say, wellness centers and having a physical space for mental health on high school campuses and middle school campuses, something like that. That's not a parochial concern of in my backyard, I need this happening, but it's more of a, kind of a strategic district-wide, we should have this for our kids. So can you talk to us about how we should think about that when we have, and I think Member Garcia brings up a great point about just strategically, we've talked about transitional kinder and knowing that we have expansion plans at the state level, and, how is that assessment done? So just how do those priorities play into the plan in front of us?
I can start off and then I'll turn it over to Ron and to Dr. Sada. Member Morowski, the way those plans or those ideas get generated is a variety of ways. Feedback, of course, the assessments, sometimes they may reveal that. If your educational plans specifically call for a wellness center because, that's part of the specifications of whatever the district is pursuing. Another way, as you're developing the facility master plan, which we did not get an opportunity to dive into too much because of COVID, we tried with the town hall meetings that we had that were virtual. But this is when that information gets shared. This is what we know. This is when we know what the needs of the community and the desires are. And you're right, we do need that feedback in order to prepare the visionary projects. And so that's when that would happen. And that's why we keep emphasizing that this plan is not necessarily, it's complete in terms of the assessments and that we've completed the equity indexes and the tools and so forth. But in terms of it evolving, that's always going to continue to happen because needs are going to change as the LCAP may change next year. And so we're going to need to keep pace with that. And so once, as Dr. Sada mentioned, we're hopefully out of this COVID environment where we can get back into the community. What should have happened is we should have had our town halls on site. We should have had a variety of vignettes and activities with our community members and our parents where they would have shared those things about green energy and the wellness centers and so forth. And we would have started compiling a list. And then that data all gets compiled and sorted and aggregated to see what's rising to the top, and then that gets shared with you guys, and then the price tags and all the the pricing that goes along with that, and then the priorities get decided about the visionary. What direction do we want to move this district into in terms of facility needs on the visionary side. So that's just one way that I've seen this done in other districts when we're starting to address and work directly with our community. But as I said, we just didn't get that that many participants because it was all done virtually. So hopefully our plan is next spring that we're going to be able to go out to the sites and collect more data. And that's why we said we're not done, that this is kind of like that first phase. And so we'll continue to add to that. And of course, that comes with a cost because our bond is only going to go so far and is going to address, well, we need to address quickly the immediate needs first, and then some of those visionaries, and then that's where the board can decide to start to move up. Like Mr. Hickey alluded to, you can start to reprioritize and say, hey, you know what, we want to move up this green energy project instead and move this one down, and it's going to be an effort. But anyway, let me turn it over to the team to see what other ideas that you guys can share with our board and how we can gather that information.
I guess I can go next. I mean, I think Rose hit it on the head. It's a living document. It will change over time. Priorities will change. I want to also underline her comment about how we attempted to get out in the community. We had set up several in-person, face-to-face community meetings with appropriate translation services and all, and then we're shut down by the Delta variant. So, I think over the long term, it's a good idea to continue to do that. As I mentioned in the presentation, two clear ideas came back to us. One was to ensure that we had a sustainability plan. And frankly, a couple of people said we need to underline that by saying a sustainability vision for the district. So that is something that, we as a staff could work on, of course, with board input, and then that can be, put into the plan. And then the request for regular live community forums. So, those lessons that came through loud and clear. And I think that's how and why the bond plan will change, or I should say the facilities plan will change over time.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think, I think the board has appropriately, allowed the district to do this work and bring back a great product. I just, I guess I do have a little bit of concern of whether we're bringing the board along and creating ways in which those priorities that we have can be expressed and translated, and that visioning process, because that's our job, right? That's those types of strategic decisions. That's where we need to have our voice heard, right? And I really appreciated the conversation about capacity for 68,000 students, and we think that we can reclaim some students by building up those doing these full renewal projects like those, and that has an effect on ADA and so forth, and that's a strategic decision. Like those those are the types of strategic kind of approaches that the board should really be weighing in on, of what we want to, what we want to do. What is our vision for the district? And I don't think at this point that we have successfully created that bridge between like what we have in terms of the facilities master plan and what the board wants to see. We've talked about having a lot of support for CTE. I don't know how this approach, addresses that, right? So I feel like there's still a little bit of a disconnect for me on how our priorities of what we're hearing from our community are reflected in here, because it is it is mostly based on data, which is great and which is objective. But I feel like we also, we're representatives of our community. And to be just parochial for a little bit, but maybe this is broader, that I feel like if we have $750 million to invest and we're not able to like upgrade a playground that is so outdated that it's just, so outdated and so not fun compared to, and this is something that people like are, the kids are playing on and people are passing by every day. And it's just like, if we can't do that, like, I feel like we're not winning, right? Like, I feel like we're dropping the ball. So like, there's just maybe some other things that we just need to think about. And I heard, that we should be like, think about functional over cosmetic or whatever, but I also think, if you think about the aesthetics, I thought that's something that we talked about, as important. So I understand, we want it to work and work in a way that creates that instructional, place that we all want our students to have. But I think there's a role for making aesthetic improvements to our school campuses. They really need it. So anyway, I feel like that was a lot that I feel like I said my piece. I would like to hear just more thoughts or a plan to sort of make sure that the board has feels like its priorities for facilities are also being addressed by the plan. And
Member Morowski, I can really appreciate your passion and the passion of this entire board. The questions have been tremendous, and I know this entire team appreciates it. But you mentioned two things. This is a great product. I think we all can agree upon this. A facilities master plan is a great product. And my expectation that it is the bridge, because it's a tool. It should inform us and guide us. And everyone that's on this call, our hands should be on that tool. And so everyone here, gets a say. You have to bring that passion into the conversation. Mm-hmm. Because what DLR, RSS, and this, Dr. Sada and this team has done, it has provided us with a tool, and shame on us if we do not use it in the best interest of this district. And that's what I believe, that this facilities master plan is the bridge that you are seeking, if we use it the way that it's designed to be used.
Okay, thank you. That's actually really, really helpful. So I think it's on us as a governance team to make sure that we are putting in place the appropriate structures for the type of decision support that we need to properly represent our communities. So I will thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. I'll leave it there and turn it over to Member Rhodes.
Okay. Thank you, Member Morowski. That was great, and I too enjoy your passion. So thank you very much for that. First off, this document is great. I really enjoyed reading through it. I enjoyed the last week's presentation and this week's presentation. The team has done a phenomenal job at kind of looking holistically at our district. I also respect what Superintendent said to our board around using this as a tool and to be able to have a clear method of categorization as we look forward to making some changes we want to see in our areas, but district wide. And also being able to not only think about our area, but as a system. One of the things that is really cool here was maybe 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak with the California chapter of the American Planning Association. And we were having conversations around, like in Meadowview, what are one of the most needy things that you guys have? What are the land use issues facing your communities, and how are people kind of going around these things? And when we talked about Sacramento Unified School District, or things that are happening here in Sacramento, one of the things that stood out for the things that your team and facilities have done to help with the facilities master plan is we've added a transparent project priority methodology, including equity indicators, right? That's not done very often. Historically, it's not done. And layering the two data points of qualitative and quantitative data to kind of help inform the board where we move forward is really cutting edge. The idea for us, I would say, as a board, we have a really cool opportunity to look at our facility uses with a social justice, even a race equity lens, and really assess how do these policies or the facilities that we have impact our most marginalized group currently and historically, and how we perpetuate or impact those outcomes. And this document, I believe, gives us a really unique opportunity to do this. Once again, I view the document, and Mr. Hickey, you can also explain if I'm viewing this wrong. I view the document as a tool to help our system and our board decide how we impact our district as a whole. It's not dictating that what we choose to do with it, but giving us an opportunity to have this informed kind of viewpoint and then layer that on. And I think that it's also important, Rose, you kind of spoke about it earlier, that once we do the assessments and kind of layer these projects out for the board, that we will go to the community. I think that is key. Member Morowski, you're very true about how we engage our community and what our community needs. As board members, we are the stewards of our communities and the community we service. That means all of Sacramento, but it definitely means our areas that we were elected to. And being good stewards means making sure that their voices are heard. If we can't make sure their voices are heard, then we're not doing our job, right? And so this also, what Rose was saying, gives us a unique opportunity to also make sure as we go into the vision projects, and I would hope even the A1 projects, that community has conversations around these things, and they can also understand how this impacts them. A lot of times our district, where we fumble, I believe sometimes, is we don't connect the policy to people and people to policy. We don't connect the facilities work to our residents and our community members, and they don't have direct buy-in to why this is happening. We have a unique opportunity, I believe, with this document to be able to engage our community differently, not around hopes and wishes that this is what we might do, but around plans of saying, this is what we have on the docket. We want your input to say what happens here. This is how much money we have to spend. This is the projects we're looking at. What do you want to see? And then having the board have more robust conversations around that. I think that's a beautiful thing. So that's why I enjoy the document. I had a chance to listen to what everybody said, and everyone had very thoughtful and insightful things to say about the whole district and about their areas, and which we have to take into consideration as we move forward as a board and a governance team. So it's really just a big kudos to the work that you guys are doing. Big kudos to the board for having this conversation. Thank you to Superintendent for bringing it back around how we utilize this. And Rose, once again, thank you kind of for leading this through. I am really impressed, and I'm looking forward, especially to that community portion as we move forward together as a district. So kudos and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Member Rhodes. Very well said. So just wanted to wrap up here and make sure that we all understand the plan for the board of what next steps are on this. So do we have an opportunity to, go back and forth with questions? Is the next step going to be the approval, like asking for board approval? And can you remind us, because the reason why I asked about, about how we structure it to make sure that we actually have our voices heard in terms of how these projects proceed, or what projects, what types of things, strategically we're pursuing as a district, is I understood that the plan is a plan with the assessments and everything, but also a prioritization methodology that ends up in a list of projects, that would all be approved as a package, and then the board would weigh in on in what priority order we put those projects. Do I have that characterized right? Or
I can go ahead and answer that, and then of course invite Mr. Hickey or Ms. Ramos to jump in. So the intent is actually to approve the tool, and of course the assessments and all the things that go into making that tool, but you're not approving the specific projects that are going to launch first. Those are going to come back with what we call a project initiation form, so that they can be approved and you can have the appropriate dialogue on an ongoing basis over time. And those will include type A1 projects and of course the vision projects as well.
And if I could just chime in right there really quick. But Member Borowski, what you are, in approving the plan, you are acknowledging, as Lee said, that in A1 projects, that those assessments are very specific. They're going to say school, number 2, for example, has a roof that has to be replaced. So that is very specific to that school. You're not necessarily approving the project because we haven't bid anything out. We haven't done anything like that. But you are acknowledging that the assessments are accurate in that, they did recognize that we have some serious deficiencies that are either health and safety, ADA compliance, or some other risk factor that's putting not only students at risk, which is, very critical, but the district for liability issues. So that part is true. Now, the second part, which is the visioning, that's simply just, again, identifying those schools that are deficient in terms of equity needs. And so those are the ones that have a little bit more, I would say, and Lee, please, if I'm not using the correct terminology here, flexibility in terms of either prioritizing or deciding what types of projects is going to satisfy that equity need in that particular site. If that makes sense. You're not approving, the board will not, by approving the plan, you're just approving the tools.
so are we approving, along with the plan, the list of projects? We're just not approving, or we're approving, we're giving our stamp of approval. I want you to tell me if I'm saying this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving our stamp of approval for, a direction to move forward with a list of projects that the tool provides us. No? So are we so I'm trying to figure this out. So Dr. Sada, you said, no, you're not approving which one comes first, but are we being asked to, when it comes back for approval, are we being asked to approve the list of what the projects will be?
So there's a couple ways that I'm going to answer that question. The first is to build on what Rose just suggested. There are roof issues at many, many, many schools. And we may come to you with a list of projects where we group them together. We may say this project is going to repair the roofs at this dozen set of schools. And we're doing a dozen because we get a much higher buying power and it's a much more economically efficient way to manage a project, right? But we're going to be looking at that facilities condition index to identify which roofs need to be replaced. Likewise, when it comes to the vision projects, we have sorted the projects in several different ways. We've shared with you category B, category B2, as well as category A2. And that each one of those different sorting mechanisms leads to a different list of projects. There definitely are some overlaps. but we're not saying you're approving at this moment any of those projects. I mean, to be honest, the $750 million will not cure all the issues at all the colleges, at all the high school, at all the schools in general, right? At all the 93 sites, and we'll say that. You know, $3.5 billion would address all the issues at all 93 sites. So there are going to be some choices and potentially some hard choices need to be made and discussed and taken back to your community and, you know, for feedback.
Mhm.
We believe we've provided you with a tool that can help you and assist in identifying, when it comes to the vision projects, some areas that historically have not had their share of funding, or the, you know, the neighborhoods have not received adequate amount of funds to improve those schools. So it's not a simple answer. I know that's a lot of nuance in there, but we want to provide some flexibility for staff to bring different sets of projects to you, and it will be documented in what we call a project initiation form, so you can have a robust discussion about the scope, the budget, the schedule, and why that particular project is being brought forth at that particular time.
And
Okay.
to somewhat sum it up, what we're asking for, Member Borowski, is the approval to use this great product to go create that list to bring back to the board. So right now, we do not have approval to create that list to bring back to the board. This facilities master plan becomes a tool upon approval for us to create that list of schools in category A1, A2,
Mhm.
B1, B2, to bring back to the board and create that priority around that list. But before we can move forward, we need the board's approval to use this tool. Without this tool, then we're unable to do the work of spending the $750 million bond.
Oh, okay. Of course. I mean, I think, you know, I don't think you'll find a lot of argument among us on, you know, whether to use the tool. I think we're just, I'm a little bit still trying to clarify that the choice set that we have to pick from, will that be constrained by the list that will be generated by the tool?
It will be informed and guided by the tool, not constrained by it, but
It's kind of what I'm asking is, you know, like if we do have other priorities that are not reflected there, is there actually an opportunity to have that discussion? Or is, if and when we say, okay, this is the approach that we're taking, are those off the table?
nothing should be off the table, but understanding that we have applied the equity lens, and based on that lens, it should produce some specific projects.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that, again, out of the $3.5 billion worth of assessments, a large portion of it will not be addressed by this particular bond. And that's really the tough work of this team,
Mm-hmm.
is prioritizing around a bond that will fall extremely short of the volume of work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Applying that equity lens, making sure that we take care of the safety of the facilities. And beyond that equity lens, what are those legacy projects that we can get done, that we can complete to the degree that our dollars allow, knowing that at the end of the day, there's no area within this district where every issue in every school will be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is as tremendous of a tool this is, and the tremendous work that has gone into it. The work going forward will make this tool wane in comparison to the conversations and the hard decisions that we have to make going forward, knowing that at the end of the $750 million bond measure, there still would be an enormous amount of work left to be done in this district.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, there's no way of doing that without bringing it back to this particular board and have a more robust conversation around what does that list of priorities look like based on the guidance from this team, with everybody having input and all of it being transparent, nothing being left off the table,
Okay.
knowing that there's an equity lens that we really need to lend ourselves to in this process.
Understood. Okay. Well, thank you. That is really helpful. I just ask, when this comes back to us, that we are very clear about, what we're being asked to approve at that point. And in terms of transparency, I wanted to ask, I don't see just this basic question. I don't see a link to the plan on the website. It wasn't linked into the executive summary for this item. So I'm just wondering, like, how can people, if they're looking for it, how can it be accessed?
Yeah, Dr. Sada, is it available somewhere already? I thought for some reason.
Yeah, we have the website is developed. It's still under a password protection, and it was shared with the board in our last meeting. And we'd be happy to reshare that again. And I believe we were going to make it a live document after the board has provided their input and approved it.
Okay. So we're making it a live, I'm sorry, I guess I missed that part. We're making it a live document.
After it's approved.
So how can the public can't comment on the follow?
Yeah, the intent of the community forums was to receive the feedback on the tool, and we've been,
Okay.
showing, kind of explaining how it works, explaining the tools, explaining the equity index. And then we wanted you board members to have access to it so you could, should you choose to, and combine that with your site tours, which I believe many of you have done.
But I believe we can make it available, pretty soon. We just wanted you all to have an opportunity to, hear the information and to be able to visit and access the website. But yeah, the intent is, Member Borowski, that it's going to be a public document with opportunity for comments, regardless of when you approve or not.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. And Trustee Phillips, sorry to take up so much time.
That's all right. Those are fantastic questions. Really good conversation. Just making sure that I understand it, because I'm gonna take it a couple more levels lower. The tool that we're talking about is and Lisa, this isn't an action item tonight, correct? Yes, it is. No, it's not. Okay.
It is not.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So the purpose in this particular product, as has been referred to, is to provide a calculation to make sure that we are hitting the neediest needs of the schools, right? I see one head shaking. So it's like, and I think it might come down to where it's a battle between maybe the haves and the have-nots. And it's like, you may have a school in, one part of the district that has a lot of things, but one major thing that's concerning for them, I'm saying them and us, because I'm trying not to, but that's just how it's coming out. But people know their schools. People in their areas know their schools. People who live in whatever neighborhood you're in, your school. If your kid is, assigned somewhere else, your school. So you know what the biggest issues are. I think that's what Lisa is saying, is that we need to make sure that we're hearing more of that input before, I guess, more of that input is going to happen after the tool generates the list. Maybe that's what it is. So after we generate the list, that list comes to us, and then we have the discussion about not how to prioritize, but the discussion as to whether we're going to approve that as a packet, so to speak. and you're going to get a bundle of needs, and the goal is to try and meet as many of those needs as possible before the bond money runs out. But I just want to make sure that what we're going to get is a list that is not going to be changeable. I know I'm saying exactly what Trustee Morawski said, but is that my understanding? We're going to get a definite list of properties that we're going to be managing, and that's
So-
what we're going to be voting on.
Yeah, so the typical process is that, I'm just annually, but it can be any period of time. The team will bring forward a list of facility, project type A and project type B. We don't have enough staff to do all the projects all at one time. We're not going to give you a list of all the projects all at one time because that wouldn't be realistic or possible. But let's say on an annual basis, I'm just making that up, we bring to you a list of project type A's and project type B's, maybe 3, maybe 5. And that's the list that you would approve for that year. And that would allow the staff to go out and hire the architects, start meeting with the user groups. Hopefully a year and a half later, we'd go out to bid. And, and then the year out, 2 after that, we'd have a constructed project. And then the same thing would happen the following year. We would have the next set of projects that are going to launch. And that would be a combination of project type A's and project type B's. And, we would have the same discussion and the board would approve those projects. And that would happen over a series of years, such that by the end of the, 10-year period, you've addressed as many things as you can, but not everything.
Okay, that makes absolute sense. Now it does. Took me a minute. Thank you, Dr. Sada.
I appreciate all of you, my fellow board members. It's taken me a minute as well. Member Rhodes. And sorry, we do have to probably wrap it up and let folks go home at some point. So
Yeah. Last question for me. I just, as we have the conversation, I do remember last time this was presented, we're talking about community input a lot, and we're talking about board input. But from my understanding, and Mr. Sada or Mr. Hickey, can you let us know how many of our district stakeholder groups actually were part of this informing this document? And I know that is it aligned with the LCAP due to those meetings and conversations? I just wanted to see, as we talk about community input, did we talk to each of our stakeholder groups? Did they have input in that way? And how did you guys go about aligning it with the LCAP? Because I see it is in line with LCAP, but were LCAP actually part of the conversations?
So I think on this question, if everybody else is okay with it, I'd like to ask Anton Lewitt, who was the longest member of this team, who had participated in several of those earlier assessments. Anton, do you want to summarize? There were several members of the CPG, for example, that were wearing both, district hats and community membership hats.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to, when you're generating sort of the insights for these things, to be speaking to those that are impacted by these decisions. So using the LCAP, we spoke to parents of students with disabilities, English language learners, students with high economic, I'm like losing my words, but not only with parents of those groups that we identified in the LCAP, but specifically members of the CAC, the DLAC, the BOC, the African American Advisory Board. We had a number of core planning group members that served on a number of those groups. We also had a number that were community-based organization leaders working with students in the community. So we had a wide cross-section specifically around either parents or community partners identified by the LCAP.
Thank you so much for that. So because as I was hearing conversation from board, it almost would seem, and just for our community out there, that you guys might not have done any community outreach, right? But what you're saying is you did connect with stakeholder groups, and you plan to connect with more stakeholder groups as you move forward. Is that the understanding I have now?
And just to add to that,
Yeah.
we met with site committees at each and every site. We also met with educators from basically every cross-section of the cohorts, from early learning, elementary, middle school, high school, across every trustee boundary. And we did a detailed 8-hour workshop to really understand what is the vision for teaching and learning, what are the supports that you need at your campuses, what are you hearing from your parents, what are the unmet needs, and what are the hopes and dreams. We also met with program experts from around the district that could speak to different areas. And then those site committees at each school had members specifically for that community. So that's all in addition to the people that I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned DLAC as well, but I just want to tell you, Member Morosky, all those things you mentioned as priorities made it to the top of the list. Like when you talk about outdoor learning, that was key. CTE, that was key. So I just wanted you to know that those priorities are very much reflected in those 6 petals, and they are backed by research for student engagement, academic performance, and college and career readiness. Those are all very powerful things.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And for Dallas, thank you for the clarification for my colleagues. I did hear it mentioned at our last meeting. It wasn't mentioned as heavily here in this meeting. So if we're diving deep in, it could seem like that we missed the whole community portion in this conversation. So I want to kind of loop that back in and kind of tie that thread for my colleagues to understand that there was extensive outreach. And even though Dr. Sato was saying that he wanted to also do on-site meetings and Delta variant hit, that was on top of what the work that you guys already have done. That wasn't singular or that was your effort that didn't come to fruition. That was something that you guys are doing on top of the things that you already did. And so I think that's a very important clarification for my colleagues because it means a lot. And that community portion means a lot. So I thank you for the clarification. And that's all the questions that I have.
Wonderful way to wrap up, Member Rhodes. Thank you so much. And everyone, Rose Ramos, Dr. Sata, Mr. Hickey, Anton, Diane, Nathaniel, Amna, Superintendent. This is a true team effort. And I think we had a very robust conversation tonight, and I know as a board really appreciate the opportunity to dive into this. It's so critical. And aside from all of the questions and things, I think we all have tremendous excitement and cannot wait to be at kind of the first ribbon cutting in person. At one of our sites from these new projects. So just really warms my heart to think about it. So without further ado, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.